To watch my exclusive content not featured anywhere on YouTube, log on to my website at imjustheretomakeyoutthink.com/films. What if America is witnessing history repeat itself in modern day times, but things won't be so recognizable to people due to the consistency of publicized social distractions already underway?
I think they're doing everything they can to instill fear in people, and I think it's ridiculous, and I think they're very disreputable. And some of the Democrats are doing it the way it should be, but some of them are trying to gain political favor by saying a lot of untruths. The fact is,
and with the public's attention focused on multiple fear-mongering social engineering experiments all at once, that provides a clear pathway for allowing strangers to propagate and implement their own deceitful hidden agendas against the population in general, or targeted at whomever they so choose to. Just think about that for a second. Because even a virus has to be injected, whether it's for food, water, electrical beams, or central processing units. And it's apparent that it can be utilized as a weapon targeted at a particular person or groups of people. So the question remains, who has control over these social engineering experiments? Because the sooner we can populate that answer, the sooner we'll know just who should be held responsible for lots of things occurring across the world. Because we don't have to reach too far back in time to recall other social engineering experiments that have been conducted upon our people, like Margaret Sanger with Planned Parenthood, the Public Health Service Division of the Department of Health and Human Services with the Tuskegee Airmen experiment, Charles Darwin and Francis Galton with eugenics, Walter Plecker with the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, and the United States with segregation laws, in which some of these laws seems as if they are still active today, because reality shows us that nothing is racially equal 100%. In your opinion, would it be too far-fetched to claim that there's an agenda to exterminate a particular group of people in today's society? And if you answered yes, then how would you explain multiple reports stating that, quote, a COVID-19 vaccine will only work if trials included Black participants? One more time for the people in the back. Multiple reports are stating that experts are saying that a COVID-19 vaccine would only work if trials include Black participants. How does that make you feel? Besides skin color variations and genders, different phenotypes and body shapes and sizes, what's the big difference between Black participants and non-Black participants other than the obvious? Wait a minute now. This article does say experts are saying this. meaning that it's a collection of people with this agenda in mind. So let's see what they have to say about this. According to this article written by Curtis Bunn of NBC News on June 17, 2020, the primary source of where this fear-mongering agenda derived from initially was, of course, left in limbo because the article says, quote, African-American participation in the trial is critical, medical experts have said. Researchers of pharmacogenetics, the science that studies how genetic factors affect reactions to drugs, stress that medicine could produce different results based on race and genetic, socioeconomic, and environmental dynamics. Translation: a vaccine might not work in African Americans if African Americans do not participate in clinical trials to create the drug. End quote. Notice how the initial creator or creators of this bizarre idea was never included in this article by name and title, only brushed off and left up to the reader to assume that these ideas are based on research conducted by medical experts, unforeseen. And it gets a lot deeper, because how will we ever know for sure that these strangers are somehow experts, as they so claim, since they are not being mentioned at all here? But NBC News does mention, however, a lady named Calethea Hodges, who is a clinician that works for a company called Infinite Clinical Trials. And according to this article, her sole job is to, quote, persuade Black people who have a deep mistrust of experimental drugs and medical institutions to participate in clinical trials to help find a vaccine for the deadly coronavirus. End quote. Yep, you heard that right. And I definitely read it verbatim. And you are awake watching this video right now, so it's no excuse. This is a major problem here, because she says disgustingly, quote, the reasons I hear African Americans will not participate are heartbreaking and disappointing. I have heard about the Tuskegee experiment a lot, and I have heard they will give me the virus and they will put a chip inside of me. And they say their parents raised them to never participate in medical research. It's all tough to overcome. Overcome? You heard about the Tuskegee experiment a lot, and this is still heartbreaking and disappointing to you? This is a prime example of all skin folk ain't kinfolk. Or rather, in this case, all skin folk won't have your best interests, only theirs. And you may even disagree, but I'll call it for what it is, and you tell it how it might be. The article goes on and mentions that Calethea Hodges said coronavirus human trials at her location will not occur for another month or two, and that she has been successful in getting so-called Blacks to participate in other trials, quote, most recently for women who experience hot flashes, through distributing educational pamphlets. Information is power, end quote. This works for her to recruit more and more people of various shades of the color brown, just because she shares the same skin complexion as they do, saying, quote, and that's why I'm here in this neighborhood that's predominantly African American. They see me and give me a chance to at least share my information with them. And when she shares this information with the people of Georgia and they still refuse to participate, she reaches for a weapon that's commonly known as fear, and invokes the experience of some cancer patients to drive it all home. Quote, when the patient with cancer hears there's nothing else we can do, they turn often to clinical trials. It's the last resort. With the coronavirus, the question becomes, would you rather be on a ventilator or try a drug? That's a view that might get people to participate, end quote. The article mentions a retired pulmonologist which is a person that creates the medicines that are considered by a non-transparent board of administrators as treatments for disorders concerning the respiratory system or the lungs in general, named Dr. Larry Graham, stating that he, quote, understands the lack of trust, but insists that African Americans have to get over it. Genetics related to racial differences make it essential that we be involved in broad-based and diverse clinical trials of medications and vaccines. The expanding discipline of pharmacogenetics, listen to that, the expanding discipline, meaning trained direction and instruction, of pharmacogenetics have taught us, have taught us that we may respond differently than other races to both medicines and vaccines. We must be sure it works in Black folks. This can only be determined by our inclusion in the research-based trials of such vaccines, end quote. So, just because a person of color carries the title of doctor, then we should trust everything a doctor recommends without any room for interrogation? So wait a minute. Are you saying that if I provide an actual cure to any disease you choose, then that cure may not work for all people? And the excuse is based on race and genetic makeup? So if I market a product right now that claims to be the cure of whatever you want to insert here, what makes an actual cure only work for a particular race of people if all humans are inserted into this life by way of the exact same process? Eugenics should ring a bell here, which carries a horrific history of racial discrimination involving the creators and dictators of social scientific studies, genetics, natural selection, biology, anthropology, and even the scientific management of mating, just to name a few things. And you may recall me mentioning throughout my previous videos a British eugenicist by the name of Francis Galton, who was the creator and cultivator of the pseudoscience known as eugenics in 1883, admitting that his works are heavily influenced by the likes of his own cousin, Charles Darwin, who is accredited with another pseudoscience of natural selection, along with this theory of man being an evolution of an actual monkey. More about this in my movie entitled Biological Warfare, that's available to be viewed right now using the link to my website below. Now, I would like for you to note that I am showing you how the enemy has no particular skin complexion, simply because the enemy comes in various skin complexions. The article directly mentions two other doctors who are brown in skin complexion that are in support of so-called Black participation in these unproven social engineering experiments. One of them mentioned goes by the name of Dr. John Maupin, who was the former president of Meharry Medical College and Morehouse School of Medicine, in which he believes that HBCU's role in testing will increase the number of so-called African American participants, saying, quote, "The problem is, do I trust them? That's why the ability for Morehouse and Meharry to have a clinical research center is valid. It will allow Black people to come. We have to have more HBCUs conducting trials because people would trust them more than they will some other institutions. I'm not saying all are untrustworthy. I'm saying there will be a greater trust in institutions led by those who come from the patient's backgrounds." End quote. The other person mentioned is Dr. Aletha Maybank, in which she is the Chief Equity Officer of the American Medical Association and Group Vice President of its Center for Health Equity, in which she feels as though things are not moving fast enough for so-called African Americans to be involved in randomized, unproven vaccination testing experiments, saying that, quote, institutions must build relationships with Black communities to gain trust in clinical trials, end quote. So now the question is, why are these experts so concerned about having participants outside of themselves being of able body to participate in vaccination testing without any restrictions? And can anybody recall a time period where any vaccine has been publicly labeled as a major breakthrough in curing anything that you could think of? And we're not about to exclude law enforcement out of social engineering experiments neither, because they do play a predominant role in regulating the national racial divide by enforcing political correctness, rules and regulations, upon those who follow under separatism motives concerning the freedom of just to be.
Let's talk about George Floyd. You said George Floyd's death was a terrible thing.
Terrible.
Why are African Americans still dying at the hands of law enforcement in this country?
And so are white people. So are white people. What a terrible question to ask. So are white people. More white people, by the way. More white people.
In the wake of all of the George Floyd protests that are still ongoing right now, as of July 8th, 2020, Donald Trump and the United States Department of Justice decides to believe that it's appropriate to name a federal law enforcement operation dubbed as Operation Legend after a 4-year-old child of color that was just recently shot and killed by unknown suspects as I record this today in Kansas City, Missouri on June 29th, 2020 by the name of Legend Taliaferro. How is this even acceptable at a time where people are still currently protesting against police brutality, racial injustice, and racial inequality? Leave your comments down below and tell me what you think. Fox News with Tucker Carlson aired a segment that I think everyone should be cognizant of. Listen very closely to what is mentioned here in this clip.
So kids should go to school. That's the new position. Now, you may have thought this was a debate that we settled conclusively in the 19th century when we banned 8-year-olds from working in factories and sent them to school. Parents are certainly on board with that. They want their kids back in the classroom in September. Every poll shows that. Most kids and most teachers probably feel the same way. So who is opposed to opening schools? Take a guess. The teachers' unions. The teachers' union's position on every question is always the same. They would like less work, no accountability, and much more pay. At least one chapter of the American Federation of Teachers is planning to go on strike if they have to work this fall. So many administrators and school districts have no choice but to obey their demands. In Miami-Dade County in Florida, that's one of the country's biggest school systems, the superintendent has warned that his schools may have to stay closed in the fall.
I will not reopen our school system August 24th. If the conditions are what they are today, our reopening plan contemplates a phase 2 reality. We are still in phase 1, a phase 1 that has degraded since over the past few weeks.
Many schools that do plan to reopen will do so under a series of restrictions that have no basis of any kind in science. It's a kind of bizarre health theater. Students will be kept 6 feet apart, everyone will have to wear a mask, class size will be limited in some schools, there will be scheduled bathroom breaks, etc., etc., no sports. In Washington State, education officials are considering letting students go back to school on the basis of their race. Non-white kids would get to go back first, while white students would be ordered to stay home until the virus subsides. Now, you may have thought that plans like that were eliminated with the Brown versus Board of Education decision 65 years ago. But no, it's all coming back.
Yep, you heard that correctly. That they are willing to allow so-called black students to be the first to return to schools, just to be sure that it's safe for so-called white students to then return to school only after it has been tested first on the so-called black students.
Education officials are considering letting students go back to school on the basis of their race. Non-white kids would get to go back first, while white students would be ordered to stay home until the virus subsides.
Once again, we can clearly see that the deceitful hidden racial agendas behind eugenics and other social engineering experiments still plays a predominant role even throughout today's society of America. I'm just here to make you think.